Night comes early in Cedar Hollow, and that night it brought a wind, like someone shaking the trees to wake up the house. I heard a knock 3 hard, knowing knocks right at the top of the stairs, and when I opened the door there she was, standing in the porch light like she owned the weather. Lorraine Price, the HOA president, hair pinned tight, coat buttoned up like armor, and that smile that never reaches the eyes. She said, "We need your place tonight." Like it was a favor, like she was doing me a kindness, and I told her no. That's where it all began. My name's Eli Mercer. My grandparents built that cabin back when this valley was all logging roads and moonlight, and the deeds are tucked in an old metal box under the floorboards paper that means more to me than any fancy association rule. I keep the place simple: wood-fired stove, a map on the wall, my dog Ranger who thinks every knock is an invitation to duel. The cabin's not in the HOA. Never was. It sits just off the gravel, a line on the county map that says private. To Lorraine, though, that line might as well have been invisible. She told me about a community emergency. She waved a clipboard. She talked about families without heat, and I could feel people in the valley looking over her shoulder like they wanted to be told what to think. I closed the door, told her I'd check on my neighbors if there really was something, and she left with that same calm, like she'd planted a seed. 2 days later, the seed sprouted into a squad car and 3 men from a private towing company, all of them polite in the way people are polite when they've already decided what they want. That's Act 1, the slow incline, where you realize the weather and the law can be used as tools, not just obstacles. Lorraine is no small-town busybody. She's strategic. She'd been eyeing properties for a while, whispering about community assets and shared resources at HOA meetings, while quietly endorsing a friend's short-term rental operation. The cabin was isolated, but it sat near a pass that people like to use in Summer Perfect for a weekend listing. Motive's a small word for something that explains everything. Profit, control, the kind of petty empire people build when they get a title and forget a conscience. Act 2 is where things get messy, the part where a man has to decide whether to stand his ground or hand the keys to a stranger who smiles too easily. Lorraine started small. Official-looking notices taped to the mailbox, emergency use notice, stamped with the HOA seal. Then someone left a paper trail, emails sent to neighbors claiming Eli's property would be needed for temporary shelter. A plow company that never served our side of the valley suddenly showed up with a bright yellow truck and a driver who kept looking at Lorraine's text messages. I set up cameras, not because I wanted a show, but because when you're alone and people start telling false stories, recording is the only way to keep the truth warm. Ranger learned to sit by the window and watch the road. I patched a pan of chili on the stove and convinced myself the whole thing would fizzle until the night the back door rattled at 4 in the morning. They came in the dark, 2 guys crouched like thieves in a movie, flashlights sweeping windows, breathing cold into the little room where my grandfather's chair sat. The trip line on the porch let out a tinny bell. Ranger barked like a foghorn. One of them froze, hand on a pry bar, and that's when I hit the recorder on my phone and stepped outside with a red lantern. I don't know what I sounded like: hangry, tired, small, but I remember the words. "You don't have my permission." The taller one tried a joke about community orders, and I told him he'd need more than a joke. He laughed. Then the sheriff's lights cut through the snow like white knives, and suddenly there were questions they couldn't fake. Lorraine's playbook had more pages. She filed a welfare check-in official-sounding report that asked officers to ensure safety of inhabitants at my address. It was thin on facts and thick on urgency. Deputies showed up, boots on the porch, flashlight upturned, and I handed over copies of the deed, the old metal box, the county map with my name written next to the line. The deputy looked at the paperwork, then at Lorraine, and I saw the shift doubt seize the room. But Lorraine had people on speed dial. She called someone at the station, and voices on the other end moved like a second current under the official record. That's the ugly edge of Act 2, when the law steps into a crowd and can be bent by a voice with a badge at the other end of a line. I could have walked it back then, let them take a night, let the story sleep, but I thought of my grandfather sitting in his chair, of Ranger's paws on the porch. This wasn't just about a chair, or a stove, or even a property line. This was about a kind of permission people take for granted when they want to be something they're not. So I did something people do know: it's both cowardice and courage, depending on how the chips fall. I went live. I set the phone on the table, pointed it at the wall where the map hung, and I talked. I showed the deed, I played the trail cam footage. I named names. I didn't sway into drama. I told what happened like you tell a friend with a coffee. Only there were strangers watching from halfway across the state and neighbors down the road. The chat filled with people who knew Lorraine's name from HOA threads, people who remembered the snow plow that showed up when the HOA wanted a clear driveway. Comments rolled in support, anger, questions, and suddenly it wasn't just my word against the president's smile. It was a record you could hold up and say, "There, see that? That's what happened." Act 3 is the showdown and the thing that makes people rewind the clip. Lorraine arrived that afternoon with a small convoy, the plow at the front, 2 cars behind it, and the confidence of someone who imagines themselves an institution. She stepped into the porch light and said, with all the piety of a woman arranging church seats, "We're executing a temporary requisition for community use." I met her in the doorway. Ranger was at my heels, ears like satellite dishes. I could have let it ghost for a written order, let them file for temporary access, but the conversation she wanted to have was theatrical. She wanted to create a scene. I didn't. "You don't get to requisition private property because you say so," I said. "If there's an emergency, call emergency services. Don't use people as props." She smiled that same small smile and called my refusal stubbornness, which is what powerful people call principle. One of her men, a young guy named Cal, tried to pull at the deadbolt with something that looked like a spare key and said, "We can make this easier." I watched his hand, and when he tried the lock, he did it in front of a camera that now had 30,000 views. Deputies came around the side, not because Lorraine asked this time, because the stream had drawn attention, neighbors had shown up, and a local reporter had called the sheriff's office with a link to the video. There was a moment ridiculous and cinematic where the whole plan unraveled in the light. Cal's face went from cocky to pale, Lorraine's voice pitched higher, and a deputy, looking annoyed and a little embarrassed, cuffed him on the porch step for attempted unlawful entry. Lorraine tried to protest, filed complaints, called lawyers, threatened countersuits, but you can't fake 30,000 witnesses and a timestamp. Her emails about community use leaked, and the text threads showing her talking about short-term rentals and a profit split became public. For every lie she'd built, there was a scrap of truth that didn't fit into the story she wanted to tell. The aftermath isn't tidy. Lorraine resigned from the board 2 weeks later, claiming pressure and personal reasons, and the HOA voted in a review committee that promised more transparency. Cal took a plea. The towing company's driver testified in an open meeting that he'd been paid to stage a friendly inspection. People like the idea of a moral arc where heroes ride off into the sunset. But this was more like winter. There was thaw, sure, but there were also long drips and repairs to be made. The sheriff's department implemented a new protocol for welfare checks. Neighbors started reading deeds like they were Bible verses, and I fixed the door where Cal had scratched the jamb. In the quiet that followed, I sat with Ranger by the fire, watching the snow lay itself over the porch, and I thought about what it had cost. Standing firm isn't about a single night or one set of handcuffs. It's about deciding where you draw a line and what you'll do when someone tries to erase it. I lost sleep. I got angry. I said things I regretted. But I also met people who'd been waiting for someone to show that the line meant something. People brought casseroles, and one neighbor who'd been quiet for years knocked and offered to help with the plow and emergent signo paperwork attached, just a neighborly hand. I'll tell you this, and it's the thing I kept coming back to. Rights are documents and deeds and lines on maps. Yes, but they're also the muscle memory of a community that remembers to show up. If someone in power decides they can repurpose your life for their benefit, the first weapon they use is the idea that you don't matter enough to stop them. The second is other people's silence. The third is a smile that sounds like law. We countered those things with cameras, with paperwork, and with one another. We countered it by refusing to believe a title makes you a king. So now, when someone asks about the cabin, I say it's quieter these days. Ranger sleeps on the rug. I keep the old metal box under the floorboards and the map on the wall. Sometimes I pull the deed out and rub the corner where my grandfather signed his name, because it reminds me why you fight for small things, because they add up to who you are. There's no neat moral here, only a truth that's almost as plain. People will try to take advantage, and sometimes they'll get away with it, but not if you're willing to name them in front of others, and not if you're willing to show the paper that proves you belong where you stand. If you've ever had a neighbor who crossed a line, or a community leader who mistook influence for entitlement, Tell me about it in the comments. What would you have done? Who needs to hear this? Share this if you think communities should know their rights. And if you think like I. Sometimes the best thing is to keep the light on and invite people in, but only if they knock and ask.